The blizzard didn't discriminate. It took equally from the worthy and the damned, and Sarah had long accepted that she belonged to neither category. She belonged to the abandoned. Her feet no longer felt the snow. The numbness had spread from her toes to her thighs hours ago, climbing toward her heart like a mercy she didn't deserve. The rejection mark on her neck, raw, still bleeding slightly where the Alpha King seal had been burned away, was the only thing that still burned. Pain, at least, proved she existed. 3 days. That's how long she'd wandered through the northern wastes after the pack cast her out. 3 days of running from the shame, from the ceremonial flames, from the eyes of 1,000 wolves who watched their king declare her unworthy of the bond. She carries no gift. She is hollow. She is lesser. His words. Even now, they cut deeper than the cold. The moon hung low and swollen above the frozen peaks, casting everything in silver that looked like mercy but felt like mockery. Sarah had learned long ago that the moon was just a stone. Beautiful stones were still stones. She collapsed against the cliff face, her breath crystallizing in front of her face. The pack furs they'd allowed her to keep, pity, she supposed, were soaked through. Her fingers were purple. Her lips had gone numb an hour ago. This was how it ended then. Not in violence, not in some dramatic reckoning, just quiet, just cold. Just the moon watching indifferently as another lesser omega froze into irrelevance. She closed her eyes. That's when she heard it, not with her ears, but somewhere deeper. A howl that split the night like lightning. Not a pack howl. Singular. Anguished. Raw with something that sounded like rage and desperation tangled together. Sarah's eyes snapped open. The wolf emerged from the storm like a ghost materializing from white, and her instincts screamed what her mind already knew. Alpha. Not just alpha. King. He was massive, shoulders broad as a cave entrance, fur midnight black with silver running through it, like scars made of starlight. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Even in wolf form, they burned with an intelligence that transcended animal, and beneath that intelligence was something broken. Something that howled because it had no other way to survive its own pain. Their gazes locked. In that moment, Sarah felt something shift in the architecture of the universe. The silver metal hung, hanging beneath her torn dress, the only thing the pack hadn't taken, because they'd forgotten it existed, grew warm against her skin, warm like it was remembering fire. The king's wolf froze mid-stride. His nostrils flared. His head tilted as if he were reading something written in the air between them, something only he could see. No, his stance said. No, this is not possible. But his wolf knew. His wolf had always known. He took a step toward her, and Sarah saw the wound, a deep gash along his left flank, still bleeding, still fresh. Whatever had hurt him had done it recently. Whatever had driven him into this storm had been worse than the storm itself. "Don't," she whispered, though she meant it as a prayer, not a command. "Please don't come closer. I'm not worth the mercy." The Alpha King shifted. Bones cracked like ice breaking under spring thaw. Fur receded. Human emerged, scarred, bleeding, beautiful in the way that broken things sometimes are. His skin was pale as starlight, his eyes still that impossible silver black that burned with depths she couldn't fathom. He looked at her for a long moment, and Sarah watched something war inside him. Duty versus instinct. Protocol versus the truth his wolf already knew. "You're dying," he said. His voice was rough velvet, a sound that belonged to someone who hadn't spoken in years. "Yes," she replied. "You're not from my pack." "No, I was. I'm not anymore." Her hand moved to her neck, touching the rejected mark. "Your seal removed me." She watched the news land in him like a stone thrown into still water. His jaw tightened. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps, or guilt. "What is your name?" he asked. Sarah, I'm Kale, he said, though she already knew. Every Omega knew the name of the Alpha King. Every wolf knew the legend of the wolf who carried the weight of an entire kingdom and had learned to make it look like strength instead of drowning. And you're coming with me, not as mercy, not as redemption, but because my wolf won't let you die, and I stopped fighting my wolf a long time ago. He extended his hand, scarred, powerful, the hand of someone who had killed and protected in equal measure. Sarah looked at it for a long moment. Then she took it. The moment their skin touched, the metal home beneath her dress flared with heat so intense she gasped. Kale's grip tightened, and for just a second, his eyes went fully silver, the color of moonlight made solid, made real. "What was that?" he whispered. "I don't know," Sarah answered, "but I think it knew you." The cave was ancient, carved from the mountain as if the stone itself had wept and left behind this hollow wound. Ice formations hung like frozen tears from the ceiling, catching the light of the fire Kyle had built with the efficiency of someone who had learned survival the hard way. Sarah sat wrapped in furs that smelled of him, pine and smoke and something older, something that made her wolf stir restlessly beneath her skin. She hadn't shifted in 3 days. Her human form was all she had left. Kyle moved through the space with the careful distance of someone defusing a bomb. He'd cleaned her wounds with water heated over the flames, bandaged her fingers, given her broth that tasted like bone and salt and care. All of it done in silence. All of it done while his jaw remained clenched so tight she worried his teeth might crack. "You need to leave," he said finally, not looking at her. "Tomorrow, when the storm passes." Sarah didn't answer immediately. She was watching the metal home, still warm against her skin, still glowing faintly when the firelight hit it just right. It was silver, ancient, inscribed with symbols she didn't recognize but somehow understood. Bond, recognition, truth. "Why did you save me?" she asked instead. "Because you were dying," he said. "Because my wolf—" He stopped himself, jaw flexing. "It doesn't matter why. It's done." "It does matter." She pulled the metal home out from beneath her dress, letting it catch the firelight. The symbols blazed gold for just a moment. "This knew you, and you knew it. I saw it in your face." Kyle turned away, his entire body going rigid. She watched his shoulders rise and fall with controlled breathing, the breathing of someone fighting not to shift, not to howl, not to let the beast inside do what it wanted. "That metal home belonged to someone," he said quietly. "Someone important, someone I—" His voice broke like thin ice under winter boots. "Someone I failed." Sarah rose slowly and approached him. Every instinct screamed at her to back down, to submit, to accept the hierarchy that said an exiled Omega had no right to push an Alpha King. But something else was louder. Something that came from the warm pulse of the metal home. Something that felt like recognition. "Tell me," she said. "No." "Kale," I said no. He whirled on her, and for a moment his eyes went fully silver again. The mark of a predator pushed to the edge of its control. Sarah felt the weight of his power like a physical thing, the pressure that came with being in the presence of someone who could destroy her with a thought, with a gesture. "You don't understand what you're asking. You don't understand what will happen if you keep pushing this." "Then explain it to me," she whispered. He laughed, and it was a sound like breaking glass. "I can't love you, Sarah, I can't. My wolf doesn't care about pack law or propriety or the fact that you were rejected. My wolf knows what you are to him, what you're meant to be to him. But I won't. I can't let it claim you, not after what happened to the last one." The silence that followed was the silence of a confessional, of a wound finally opened after years of being stitched closed. "What happened?" Sarah asked. I chose duty over her, Kyle said. I chose my kingdom, my pack, my responsibilities. I chose everything except the one thing she needed me to choose, and she died because of it. She died thinking I didn't love her enough to fight for her. He turned back to the fire, and Sarah saw the truth written in every line of his body. The guilt was a physical thing, a wolf he carried inside him that was more dangerous than any enemy. So I won't make that mistake again, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I won't let myself feel this. I won't let myself believe that we're... He stopped, swallowed hard. Tomorrow, you leave. I'll give you supplies, coordinates to a settlement 2 days' walk from here. You'll build a new life, away from me, away from this kingdom, away from a fate that will only destroy you. Sarah wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that she was already destroyed, that rejection had already hollowed her out, that there was nothing left to break. But she saw the war inside him, the battle between the king who made rational choices and the wolf who remembered her scent, her taste, her rightness. So instead, she reached out and placed her hand over his heart. She felt it racing beneath her palm, felt the wild thunder of it, the chaos of it, the howling need of it. I can't love you either, she said softly. Not yet. Not like this. But tomorrow, when I leave, my wolf will remember yours. And every night when the moon rises, I'll feel it calling. And I think... She paused, watching his eyes, still burning silver, still fighting. I think maybe that's not weakness. I think maybe that's the truest thing either of us has left. Kyle looked at their joined hands for a long moment. Then he pulled away, not cruelly, but with the finality of someone cutting a rope to save them both from falling. Get some rest, he said. We leave at dawn. Sarah watched him move to the far side of the cave, as far from her as the space allowed. She watched him wrap himself in furs and turn his face to the stone wall. But she heard it, the moment he thought she was asleep. A single, anguished howl that echoed through the cave like a prayer being denied by heaven itself. And beneath her dress, the metal home pulsed warm against her skin, as if answering him back. The settlement wasn't far. 2 days' walk through terrain that Kale navigated with the kind of efficiency that suggested he'd mapped every stone, every pass, every treacherous drop. He stayed 3 paces behind her at all times, a distance that felt less like protection and more like exile. They didn't speak. The silence between them had become a third presence, heavy and watchful. On the first night, Sarah built a small fire while Kale hunted. She sat with her hands wrapped around the metal hoe, feeling it pulse gently beneath her palms like a heartbeat that wasn't her own. The symbols seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them, ancient words in a language her wolf understood even if her human mind couldn't translate. Bond broken seeking, king guarded failing, omega exiled returning. When Kale returned with fresh kill, he found her studying it in the firelight. His entire body went still. Where did you get that? His voice was sharp, dangerous. I've always had it, Sarah said. Since I was born. My mother said it belonged to her mother and hers before that. She said it was a promise. A promise of what? She didn't know. She said every woman in our line carried it, but none of them ever understood why. They just knew it mattered. Sarah looked up at him. Did you know someone who had one like this? Kale turned away and began preparing the meat for cooking. His movements were rigid, controlled, the physical language of someone holding themselves together through sheer force of will. My mate, he said finally, the one I told you about. She wore one exactly like that. She said it was a family heirloom. I never really understood the significance. I was too busy building my kingdom, too busy proving I was worthy of the crown. His laugh was bitter. Too busy being king to be present for the woman who was supposed to be my queen. Sarah felt something shift inside her, a recognition that went deeper than instinct, deeper than the bond between wolf and mate. "This is why," something whispered. "This is why the metal hone knew him. This is why your wolf remembers his." "What was her name?" Sarah asked. "I don't say it anymore," Kyle replied. "It hurts too much." They ate in silence. But as the night deepened and the fire burned lower, Kyle moved closer to the flames. Not to her, he maintained his careful distance, but the gap between them narrowed slightly, as if his control was fraying at the edges. "Tell me about yourself," he said suddenly. "Not the rejection, not the pack that cast you out. Tell me who you were before." So Sarah did. She told him about growing up in the foothills, about the long summers and the winters when her family would gather around fires like this one. She told him about discovering she had no shifting gift, no talent with healing or running, or any of the skills that made an Omega valuable to a pack. She told him about the quiet shame of it, the slow realization that she was less than, other than, not enough. "And then one day," she said, "the king was visiting our territory, and I saw him, just for a moment. And I felt—" She stopped, aware of how it would sound, aware of how dangerous it was to admit. "What did you feel?" Kyle asked quietly. "Like the metal home was burning," she whispered. "Like something inside me was waking up and reaching toward you across the distance, even though I had no right to reach toward anything." She watched his jaw clench, watched the war in his eyes between the king's duty and the wolf's need. "The settlement is one more day's walk," he said, his voice rough. "We'll arrive tomorrow before nightfall. You'll have a safe place there, a community, a chance at a real life, not tied to the tragedy of a kingdom or the complicated grief of an alpha king who doesn't know how to let himself be saved." "And if I don't want that?" Sarah asked. "Then you're a fool," Kyle replied, "because I cannot give you what you deserve, and my wolf cannot stop trying, and the only way either of us survives this is if you walk away." He stood up abruptly and moved to the edge of their small camp, his back to her, his shoulders tense as drawn bowstrings. Sarah listened to his breathing slow, deepen. She felt the moment he shifted into his wolf form, a change that looked like pain and looked like relief all at once. He settled on the rocks at the camp's perimeter, a guard dog who was also a prisoner. She reached out with her mind, the way her wolf had learned to do since that first moment in the snow, and she whispered across the distance between them, "I hear you howling. I feel it in my bones, and I'm not afraid." She felt him flinch at the mental contact, felt him trying to pull away, but his wolf held steady, and for just a moment, before he severed the connection, she felt the echo of what he was truly feeling. Not rejection, not duty, just desperate, aching, terrified love. "And now I invite you to leave a trace of your presence. Tell us in your thoughts where you are in the world and at what hour this story finds you. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moment of night they touch your heart." The settlement was built into the mountainside, stone structures that seemed to grow from the earth itself, smoke curling from chimneys like prayers sent to a sky that wasn't listening. Kyle left her at the entrance, handing her a satchel of supplies and a letter of introduction, sealed with his royal mark. "There's someone here," he said, "a healer named Mara. She'll help you integrate, find work, build a life. Give her the letter. She'll understand." "Understand what?" Sarah asked. "That you're not to be questioned about your past, that you have my protection, even from a distance." He paused, and for the first time since the cave, he looked directly into her eyes. "And that if anyone tries to hurt you, they'll answer to me." "Kyle." "Goodbye, Sarah," he said, and his voice carried the finality of a closing door, a gate locked, a possibility made impossible. He turned to leave, and something inside her fractured. The metal home, always warm, always pulsing with its own internal heat, suddenly blazed so hot she gasped. It burned against her skin like a brand, and the pain of it was so intense that she fell to her knees. "Kyle!" His name tore from her throat like a howl-given voice. "Wait, something's—" He spun back instantly, his alpha instincts overriding whatever boundaries he'd tried to construct. He was at her side in seconds, his hands hovering over her without touching, his eyes wild with concern and fear. "What is it? Are you hurt? Do you need—" "I don't know," Sarah gasped. "The metal home. It's—" She looked down at her chest and realized the symbols had changed. They were glowing now, not with the soft gold of before, but with a brilliant silver-blue light that seemed to come from inside the metal itself. And they weren't just symbols anymore. They were words, written in a language she somehow understood. Pathfinder, healer of broken faiths, seer of hidden truths, the Omega who guides the king home. "No," Cale whispered, and she heard the fear in his voice, the desperate denial. "No, Sarah, that can't be." "What does it mean?" she asked. "It means you have a gift," Mara's voice said, and Sarah looked up to see an older woman with silver hair and eyes that held the weight of centuries. "It means you were never less than. It means every pack that failed to see your value was blind." Sarah felt something awakening inside her, a presence that had always been there but had been sleeping, waiting for the right frequency, the right moment of recognition, the right alpha to call it forth. She could see things suddenly, not with her eyes, but with something deeper. She could see the threads connecting all living things, the invisible webs of fate and bond and belonging that held the world together. And at the center of her vision, burning brighter than anything else, was a thread of pure gold that stretched back toward the forest where Cale was trying to leave her. A thread that connected directly to his heart. A thread that had always connected them. "The Pathfinder gift," Mara explained gently, helping Sarah to her feet. "One Omega in 1,000 generations carries it. They can sense the bonds between souls, see the threads of fate that bind people together. They can heal old wounds, guide lost wolves home, and most importantly," she looked directly at Cale, "they can show an Alpha King that he's not alone in his grief. That redemption isn't something you earn through suffering. It's something you accept when you're finally ready to stop running from it." Cale's face had gone white. She watched him process the revelation, watched him understand what it meant. His wolf was already howling beneath his skin, a sound that wanted so desperately to be released. "You can't stay with me," he said. But his voice was breaking now, the careful control finally fragmenting. "Even with a gift, even with Sarah, I'll destroy you. I'll fail you like I failed." "You didn't fail her because you loved her," Sarah interrupted, and her voice carried the weight of her new gift. The clarity of something that could see into the darkest parts of a soul and still choose to illuminate them with compassion rather than judgment. "You failed her because you thought love meant erasing yourself. But I don't need you to erase yourself. I need you to become yourself, to be the king who grieves, who struggles, who wants to be better." She took a step toward him, and the metal home burned with silver light between them. "I can see your thread," she said softly. "I can see where it's tangled, where it's broken, where it wants to knot itself with something kind and true. Let me show you what your wolf already knows. Let me guide you home." The battle in him was visible now, the king versus the wolf, duty versus instinct, grief versus hope. She watched them wage war behind his silver eyes. And then she watched the wolf win. The journey back was not the careful distance of their walk to the settlement. Cale traveled with Sarah held close to his chest while in wolf form, or walking with his hand permanently at the small of her back while human. There was no space between them anymore, not since she'd unveiled the Pathfinder gift, not since the metal home had recognized them as two halves of a single thread. But the kingdom didn't know yet. And when they arrived at the castle, stone and ice towers that reached toward the sky like prayers, Kyle stopped at the gates and looked down at her with something that was equal parts terror and determination. "There will be those who oppose this," he said. "Those who remember my mate. Those who see you as a threat to the pack's stability. My advisors will counsel against you. The pack hierarchy will resist. Everything you've survived up until now was just the prelude." "I'm not afraid," Sarah said, and it was true. The Pathfinder gift had shown her something the rejected Omega could never have understood. Fear was just the shadow cast by possibilities, and she could see all the possibilities now, could sense which threads led where, could navigate the complex web of fate that bound kingdoms and packs and broken hearts together. "You should be afraid," Cale replied, "but I'm grateful you're not, because I'm terrified enough for both of us." He took her hand and led her into the castle. The throne room was vast and cold and filled with the weight of centuries. The pack gathered, alphas and healers, warriors and elders, and Sarah felt their eyes on her like physical pressure. She could sense their emotions through the threads: suspicion, grief, anger, curiosity. And at the head of the room, on a throne of ice and iron, sat the king. "I've brought an Omega to the castle," Kyle announced, his voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who needed no permission. "Her name is Sarah, and she carries the Pathfinder gift. She will be treated with the respect due to someone of her station. She will be protected, and anyone who questions this—" His eyes swept across the assembled wolves, landing briefly on each face. "Will answer to me." Silence. Then, from the crowd, a voice stepped forward. "My king, this is unprecedented. An exiled Omega with a gift that hasn't manifested in 3 generations. How can we be certain she's not a threat? How can we trust—" "Because her gift sees truth," Sarah said, and her voice, enhanced by the power of the metal hoe, seemed to echo through the chamber. "And I can already see the threads of this kingdom. I can see where you're bleeding, the old wounds that won't heal, the grief that King Cale carries alone, the way the loss of his mate fractured something at the very heart of your pack." She stepped forward, and the threads of fate became visible to the assembled wolves. She could feel it in the way they flinched, the way they sensed the truth of her words vibrating through the very air. "I'm not here to replace anyone," Sarah continued. "I'm here to help us all see what we've been too afraid to look at directly. The king's mate died, not because he loved her wrong, but because this kingdom, this pack, was built on the denial of weakness, on the belief that an alpha must never show pain, never admit fear, never ask for help." She turned to face Kyle on his throne of ice and iron. "And I'm here to change that, with him, if he'll let me." The silence in the throne room was absolute. Then Kyle rose, slowly, deliberately, his form towering over even the assembled alphas. He descended the throne steps and took Sarah's hand. In front of everyone, in front of the entire pack, in front of the kingdom that had taught him that duty meant erasing everything human inside him. He brought her hand to his heart. "I can't love you," he said, his voice carrying all the irony and all the truth of those words. "I've already failed at love. I've already destroyed someone by trying to be perfect." He paused, and she felt his heartbeat racing beneath her palm. "But I will try. I will stumble. I will probably fail again. And if you're willing to see that failure not as weakness, but as the only honest thing I have to offer, then maybe we can build something real here. Something that doesn't pretend to be perfect. Something that admits it's broken and chooses to heal anyway." He looked down at her with eyes that had finally stopped fighting their own nature. "Stay," he said simply. "Not as a prize or a redemption or a solution to a kingdom's problems. Stay as my wolf's mate. Stay as my equal in this grief and this hope and this messy, complicated, terrifying love." The metal home pulsed between them, blazing with light so bright that everyone in the throne room had to shield their eyes. And Sarah, exiled, broken, Rejected Sarah, who had been told she was less than her entire life, finally understood what the ancient words inscribed on the metal home had always meant. You were never meant to be rescued. You were meant to be recognized. 3 weeks. That's how long the peace lasted before the letter arrived. It was sealed in black wax, and the moment Kyle opened it, Sarah felt his entire body go rigid. Through their bond, still new, still finding its shape, she felt the ice of shock, the heat of rage, the drowning sensation of a threat too large to ignore. "What is it?" she asked, already moving to his side. "My mate's father," Cal said, his voice tight as a drawn blade. "The pack that raised her. They're coming to the castle. They say they have proof that she didn't die from grief. They say she was murdered, and they're accusing." He looked at Sarah, and she watched him struggle to say the words. "They're accusing me." The throne room erupted when they announced the trial. The pack split into factions, those who supported their king, those who doubted him, those who saw the arrival of the old pack as an opportunity to seize power. The castle became a pressure cooker of tension and fear, and the kind of rage that builds when old wounds are reopened by someone determined to make you bleed again. Sarah used her Pathfinder gift to navigate the threads of truth through the lies. She walked the castle, sensing the bonds between wolves, seeing the moments where doubt had taken root. And in the private chambers of the old pack's representatives, she found it, the memory, preserved in a journal, of the truth. His mate had been murdered, but not by Cale, by her own father, because she'd refused to abandon Cale, refused to honor the alliance the old pack wanted to forge with a rival kingdom. She'd chosen love over duty, and her father had poisoned her rather than allow the disgrace. And then he'd lied. He'd let Cale believe it was grief, let him carry the guilt, let him punish himself for decades. Sarah brought the evidence before the throne, and the kingdom fractured. "You would take the word of an exiled Omega over the honor of an ancient pack?" the old Alpha demanded. "She's biased, obviously. She's his mate-to-be. Of course she would." "Because her gift doesn't lie," another voice said. Mara stepped forward, the healer from the settlement, Sarah's mentor, and something else, too. Something that the Pathfinder gift showed Sarah with sudden crystalline clarity. Kyle's mate's sister. The family the king had never known reached out to him. "I'm Mara," she continued, her eyes fixed on the old Alpha. "I'm Lysa's sister, and I've spent 30 years wondering what really happened to her, wondering if my father truly took her life in his despair or if something darker had occurred." She looked at Sarah, and Sarah felt the weight of her recognition. Another Pathfinder, an older one, whose gift had been dormant until Sarah's awakening drew it back to life. "My gift shows me the same thread this Omega sees," Mara said, "and that thread leads directly to our father's hands, to his poison, to his fear that Lisa would shame our bloodline by choosing love over alliance." The old Alpha stood, his form beginning to shift, his rage making the very air crackle. "This is a conspiracy." But before he could complete the shift, Kyle rose from his throne. In an instant, he was no longer the broken king trying to hold himself together through duty. He was the Alpha, pure, primal, righteous. His form was magnificent and terrible, silver and black and burning with the power of 1,000 wolves who had finally been given permission to stop pretending they weren't suffering. The old Alpha never completed his transformation. The duel was over in moments, not because Kyle was necessarily stronger, but because for the first time in his life, he was fighting for something other than control. He was fighting for grief that had finally been allowed to exist. He was fighting for the woman who had died believing he didn't love her enough. He was fighting for the right to fail and grieve and heal. When it was done, and the old Alpha lay defeated before the throne, Cale shifted back to human form. He was breathing hard, bleeding from a dozen small wounds, his eyes still burning with the intensity of a wolf who had finally been released. He walked to Sarah and took her hands. "I didn't kill her," he said, and she heard the relief in his voice, the terrible, overwhelming relief of a burden finally being set down after 30 years of carrying it alone. "I know," Sarah replied. "I've always known. The threads showed me." He pulled her close, and she felt him shaking. Not from the fight, from the release of it, the shattering of the careful walls he'd built around his heart. "I loved her," he whispered into her hair. "I failed her in so many ways, but I did love her. I just didn't know how to show it while being king." "I know," Sarah said again, and she knew too. "I can see it in the threads of your bond. She never stopped believing you loved her. The only one who didn't believe it was you. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen." The season changed. Winter released its grip on the kingdom, and spring came slowly, tentatively, as if it wasn't quite sure it was safe to emerge. The castle transformed. Ice melted into water, stone revealed colors that had been hidden beneath frost, and in the gardens, flowers began to bloom in defiance of all the years they'd spent frozen. Sarah sat in those gardens with her hand over Cale's heart, feeling his heartbeat slow and steady beneath her palm. The Pathfinder gift had shown her something remarkable. Grief wasn't something you overcame. It was something you learned to carry, and the carrying of it became lighter as you allowed yourself to cry. And Cale was learning to cry. Some nights, she'd find him in the war room, looking at maps and journals and old letters from his mate, and he'd weep. And Sarah would sit beside him and let the tears come. Let the decades of held-back sorrow finally find release. And the castle, ancient and cold and built on the foundations of 1,000 years of kings who'd learned to be strong by forgetting how to be human, began to transform. The pack noticed. The advisors noticed. The wolves who had doubted Sarah's presence began to see something unexpected. Their king was becoming stronger, not weaker, by admitting his weakness. "There's something you need to know," Mara said one afternoon, finding Sarah in the gardens. "Something about the metal home." Sarah held it up, feeling its familiar warmth. The symbols had stopped glowing as brightly, but they were still visible, a permanent reminder of the threads that bound people together. "It's not just a gift," Mara explained. "It's a key. The women in our bloodline, women with Pathfinder gifts, they carry the ability to heal the very fabric of bond itself. We can take broken mates and make them whole again. We can take kingdoms fractured by grief and help them remember how to feel." "What do you mean, help them remember?" Sarah asked. "I mean that my gift is dying," Mara said softly. "I've carried it for 100 years, and the weight of it is becoming too much. I need someone younger, stronger, more connected to the threads of hope than I am." She paused. "I need to pass it to you, and when I do, you'll become something more than an Omega or an Alpha. You'll become a guardian of bonds themselves." Sarah felt the weight of that responsibility settle on her shoulders like a mantle, but she also felt something else. Readiness. "What do I need to do?" she asked. "Come to the temple tonight," Mara said. "At moonrise. Bring Kyle, and bring your willingness to accept something larger than just love, something like destiny, but one that you choose rather than one that chooses you." The temple was ancient, older than the castle, older perhaps than the kingdom itself. It was carved from pure marble and silver, and at its center stood a pool that reflected the moon like a mirror made of sky. Cale stood on one side of the pool, Sarah on the other. Mara stood between them, her body already beginning to glow with the silver light of her gift. "The metal home brought you together," Mara said. "But it wasn't random. It wasn't fate forcing your hands. It was a call, from your bloodline to his, from two wolves who needed to find each other in order to remember what redemption actually looks like." She placed her hands on the metal home, and Sarah felt the transfer begin. It was like being struck by lightning and engulfed in warmth all at once. Power flooded through her, Not the power to control or command, but the power to see and understand and heal. She saw every broken bond, every fractured heart, every grief that had been carried alone for too long. And when she opened her eyes, Kyle was looking at her with an expression of such profound love that she nearly couldn't bear it. "Come with me," he said, and extended his hand across the pool. Sarah walked toward him, and their hands met over the water. And in that moment, the metal home blazed one final time, not with need or seeking, but with the pure gold light of recognition complete, of threads finally knotted together, of two halves made whole. "I love you," Kyle said. "I'm still going to fail sometimes. I'm still going to carry grief and struggle and doubt. But I want to do all of that with you." "And I love you," Sarah replied, "the wolf inside you and the king and the man who grieves and all the broken pieces trying to heal. I love all of it." The metal home cooled against her skin, its work finally done. But the warmth of the bond remained, would always remain, a reminder that love was never about perfection. It was about choosing to keep showing up, choosing to keep trying, choosing over and over again to believe that redemption was possible. Spring deepened into summer, and the kingdom flourished. The king who had learned to grieve led with a gentleness that surprised everyone, including himself. Laws changed. Omegas were no longer measured by gifts they possessed, but by the value they brought through simply being present. Wolves were allowed to mourn, to struggle, to admit when they were failing. And the Pathfinder King, that's what they called Kale now, when they thought he wasn't listening, walked among his people with a woman at his side who could see the threads binding them all together. Sarah stood in the grand hall on a summer evening, watching the kingdom gather. There was no ceremony. They'd decided against the rituals that often accompanied mate bonding in packs, all the elaborate displays of power and possession. Instead, they simply stood together and asked the witnesses to see them as they were. "I was thrown to the wolves," Cal began, his voice carrying to the farthest corners of the hall. "And I learned that being an alpha meant never showing a wound, never admitting I was bleeding." He took Sarah's hand, "until I found an Omega who had been thrown to the wolves and refused to pretend she wasn't broken. And in her breaking, I learned that strength isn't about holding everything together. It's about choosing to heal together." Sarah squeezed his hand and continued, "I was rejected for having no gift, and I spent my life believing I was less than, until I found an alpha king who was also being rejected, not by his pack, but by himself. And in his acceptance of his own failure, I learned that my gift was never about fixing things. It was always about seeing things clearly and choosing to love them anyway." The metal home hung between them, no longer glowing, but still warm, still present. A physical reminder of the threads that bound them, not chains, but connections, not obligations, but choices. "We're not promising perfection," Sarah said, and she heard Mara smile in the crowd. "We're not promising that we won't fail or grieve or struggle. We're promising to do all of that together, to keep choosing each other even on the days when it's hard." Kyle brought her hand to his heart. The gesture they'd made 100 times now would make 1,000 times more. "I can't love you," he said, and the entire hall went still at the echo of his impossible words. "I can't love you the way a king is supposed to, perfectly, absolutely, without doubt or fear or the weight of everything I've failed at before." He looked directly into her eyes, and she saw the full truth of him reflected there. All the grief, all the hope, all the terrifying possibility of a love that was real instead of constructed. "But I will love you the only way I know how, badly sometimes, messily, with all the cracks and breaks still showing. And I will keep choosing that every single day for the rest of my life." Sarah rose up on her toes and kissed him, not delicately, not with the restraint of a formal ceremony, but with the passion of someone who had been told she was worthless and had finally found someone worth enough to spend her forever on. The kingdom erupted, not in the cheers of ritual triumph, but in the genuine joy of a pack that had learned to hope again, that had learned that broken things could bond, that had learned that redemption didn't look like victory. It looked like standing beside someone and saying, "Yes, this, always this." Later, alone in the tower overlooking the kingdom, Sarah and Kyle stood beneath the moon. It was high and bright, casting everything in silver that looked like mercy and actually was mercy this time. "What do you see?" Kyle asked, his arm around her waist, their bond singing through them like a shared heartbeat. Sarah closed her eyes and let the Pathfinder gift show her the threads of the future. She saw struggles ahead. There would be wolves who questioned their king's choices, enemies who would test the kingdom's newfound vulnerability, losses that couldn't be prevented. But she also saw threads of connection, of wolves learning to grieve together, of alphas learning that admitting weakness was the strongest thing they could do, of a kingdom built not on the denial of pain, but on the honest, brave choice to transform it into compassion. "I see us," she said finally. Older, still struggling, still learning, but never alone, never pretending anymore. Kyle pulled her close, and she felt his wolf singing beneath his skin, not restless anymore, not fighting to be released, but satisfied. Finally at peace. "That's enough," he whispered into her hair. "That's more than enough." The metal home rested between their hearts, no longer burning but still present. A reminder that love wasn't about being saved. It was about being seen, and about choosing, every single day, to see the person beside you, all of them, the broken and the strong and everything in between, and deciding they were worth every risk, every failure, every moment of terrifying vulnerability. Below them, the kingdom slept under the summer stars, and in the gardens where flowers had learned to grow again, the moon cast its light on two alphas, one wolf and one human, who had learned that the greatest strength of all was the courage to stop running from who you actually were. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins us keeps the flame of redemption alive.